What if I told you that what hurts you isn't what happens, but how you interpret it? What if the key to never being shaken by anything or anyone had been inside you all along? What if the real reason for your pain was a lie you've been carrying without realizing it? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The truth is, you are trapped in a cycle of suffering not because the world is unfair, but because your mind is still conditioned to react like a prisoner. You think you need to change the world when, in reality, all you need to do is change yourself. If you feel like you're always dependent on circumstances to feel okay, that your peace is easily stolen by people, events, or past memories, then you're stuck in a game you can never win. Because as long as you try to control what's outside, you'll remain a slave to what happens around you. But what if I told you there's a way out of this game? That true peace isn't a state of eternal calm, but a way of seeing the world. Today we're going to break down all the illusions that keep you trapped by your own emotions and learn what it truly means to have an unshakable mind. So tell me, are you ready to finally understand why nothing and no one should ever affect you again? You've spent your whole life believing that to be at peace, you need to control what happens around you. You think that if you could avoid certain people, if the world were fairer, if things went according to plan, then you could finally relax. But the truth is, this desire for control is the greatest illusion ever sold to you. The more you try to control, the more you suffer, because reality will never mold itself to your expectations. And when it fails to meet them, what happens? Frustration, anger, fear, despair. All of these emotions arise because you still haven't realized that the problem was never in what happens, but in how you react. Carl Jung reminds us that everything you project onto the external world is merely a reflection of what happens within you. In other words, it's not the situations that affect you, but the meaning you assign to them. The same experience can destroy one person and strengthen another, simply because each has a different perception of reality. This is why some people seem to handle challenges without being shaken, while others collapse at the slightest sign of adversity. It's not life that brings them down, but the way they interpret events. Imagine a raging river. If you try to swim against the current, you'll exhaust yourself, panic, and in the end, you might even drown. But if you learn to flow with the water, accepting the direction of the current, you can find balance even within the chaos. Unshakable peace doesn't come from avoiding challenges, but from learning to face them with serenity. When you realize you no longer need to control everything, something shifts within you. Fear gives way to acceptance. Anxiety makes room for trust, and suddenly, the external world loses its power to affect you. The problem is that you've been conditioned to seek security in external things. Since childhood, you were taught that your happiness depends on things going right, on people approving of you, on favorable outcomes. But that will never be enough, because as long as your peace depends on factors beyond your control, you will always be vulnerable, always at the mercy of others, of fate, of circumstances. And that is not freedom, it's a prison. True liberation happens when you understand that nothing outside of you can steal your peace unless you allow it. This doesn't mean you'll never feel sadness, anger, or frustration again. Emotions will arise because they are part of the human experience. But the difference is that when you stop identifying with these states, they lose their power over you. You feel the emotion, but you are not controlled by it. You observe the storm, but you don't let it carry you away. And that is exactly what separates those who live in suffering from those who find true freedom. While most people keep trying to shape the world to fit their expectations, those who awaken realize that the secret lies in changing themselves. It doesn't matter what happens out there because their strength comes from within. When you finally understand this, you realize there is nothing that needs to change for you to be happy, only the way you see the world. The path to an unshakable mind is not about trying to control life, but about becoming so strong internally that nothing external can shake you. The moment you stop fighting what you cannot change and start focusing on what is within your control, suffering begins to fade. What once seemed unbearable becomes nothing more than a passing event. You stop clinging to the illusions that imprisoned you and begin to live with a lightness that few ever experience. Because in the end, this is the great lesson. Life will always be uncertain, but you don't have to be a prisoner to it. Now the question remains, are you ready to release the chains of control and finally experience true peace? Since childhood, you've been programmed to believe that certain things were absolute truths. Your fears, your insecurities, and the way you react to the world were shaped long before you were even aware of it. You learned to interpret the world based on what you were told, the experiences you had, and most importantly, what your subconscious absorbed without you even realizing it. And today, without knowing it, you carry this baggage in every thought, every emotion, every choice. But the worst part? You believe these reactions are yours. Carl Jung explained that what you don't bring into consciousness will continue to govern your life as if it were fate. This means that unless you question the patterns that were implanted in you, you will keep repeating the same pains, the same mistakes, and the same cycles without understanding why. You feel anxious, you feel angry, you feel afraid, but you don't know where it comes from. And what do? You blame the world, you blame others, you blame circumstances. But what if I told you that the source of your suffering isn't outside of you, but within? From an early age, you absorbed ideas about what it means to be loved, accepted, and safe. If in childhood you had to please others to be noticed, you might now fear disappointing people. If at some point your pain was ignored, you might struggle to express how you feel. If for any reason you learned that you weren't good enough, you might spend your life seeking validation, trying to prove your worth. But none of this truly belongs to you. These are just echoes of the past, voices that still rule your present. The problem is that because these patterns are deeply rooted in your subconscious, you don't notice them. You simply react. Something happens, and before you can even think, the reaction is already there. Fear, anger, sadness. You don't choose to feel these things. They just arise. And why? Because the part of you that is still trapped in the past continues to operate on autopilot. You think you're in control, but in reality, it's your wounded self that is guiding your actions. The mind creates defense patterns to prevent you from reliving old pains, but in doing so, it also keeps you trapped. Every time you react without questioning, you reinforce these patterns, and little by little, your life becomes a repetition of the same conflicts, the same anxieties, the same fears. You end up living according to a script you didn't write, but there is a way out. The first step is realizing that these reactions are not you. They are just conditioned parts of your mind. You are not the fear you feel, not the insecurity that takes over you, not the anger that erupts without warning. These are just automatic responses from a system that needs to be reprogrammed. And the only way to do that is by bringing to light what has been hidden. When you start observing your emotions instead of being controlled by them, something incredible happens. You discover that you can feel anger without acting aggressively. You can feel fear without running away. You can feel sadness without drowning in it. The difference? Awareness. True power doesn't come from never feeling negative emotions, but from not being enslaved by them. Because as long as you're on autopilot, anything can throw you off balance. A criticism can break you. A failure can paralyze you. Abandonment can convince you that you are unworthy of love. But when you learn to see these triggers as echoes of the past, rather than absolute truths, they lose their power over you. And that is the first step to becoming truly free. When you start questioning yourself, when you stop blindly believing everything your mind tells you, you gain a power that few people have, the power to choose whether to be swept away by impulse or to simply observe it, to choose whether to react as you always have or to create a new response, to choose whether to remain a prisoner of your mind or finally take control of your own life. Now tell me, how much longer will you allow your past to dictate your present? True peace doesn't come from avoiding problems or trying to control everything around you. It arises when you realize you no longer need to cling to anything to be happy. The idea that happiness comes from something external, success, recognition, security, is an illusion. You can achieve all of these and still feel empty. You can have everything under control and still be on the brink of internal chaos, because peace has nothing to do with what's outside but with what happens within you. Carl Jung and the great thinkers of history have shown this in different ways. Stoicism, for example, teaches that it's not what happens that determines our suffering, but how we interpret events. You can lose a job, end a relationship, face betrayal, and all of it can be seen as a tragedy or as liberation. The event remains the same, but the way you react changes everything. And this is the key to never being a prisoner of the outside world again. Understanding that pain only controls you when you hold on to it. Attachment is the root of suffering. You cling to ideas, to people, to expectations, and when reality doesn't match those desires, you suffer. You want people to behave a certain way, life to follow a script, the future to be predictable, but none of that is under your control. And as long as you keep fighting against what is, you will continue to feel frustrated. You will continue to suffer. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive in life. It means stopping the waste of energy trying to change what cannot be changed. It means letting go of the illusion that things should be different and starting to work with what exists. It means understanding that resistance to reality is what prevents you from finding peace. Look around you. How many people live in a constant battle against life? They get irritated by traffic, by the weather, by other people's opinions. They argue over trivial things, dwell on the past, worry about the future. They live tense, anxious, always waiting for something to happen so they can finally feel okay. But that day never comes, because peace is not in tomorrow, nor in perfect circumstances. It can only be found in the now. When you let go of the desire for control, something incredible happens. Suddenly, what used to irritate you no longer affects you as much. What once scared you loses its power. What seemed unbearable becomes just a passing detail. You realize that you were always fighting ghosts, battling expectations created by your own mind. Imagine a boat in the middle of the ocean. If you try to hold back the waves, you'll exhaust yourself and sink. But if you learn to navigate with them, if you let go of the need for control and simply go with the flow, the sea stops being a threat and becomes a path. Life works the same way. The more you cling to control, the more you suffer. The more you learn to accept, the more freedom you find. This doesn't mean you'll never feel pain, anger, or fear again. Emotions are natural. They are part of the human experience. But the difference is that you stop resisting them. You see them, accept them, and let them pass. What once consumed you now simply flows. And that is true peace, not the absence of problems, but the freedom of no longer being enslaved by them. So now I ask you, how much longer will you keep trying to hold back the waves instead of learning to navigate? If you've made it this far, you've already realized that true peace doesn't come from trying to control the world, but from learning to control yourself. It doesn't come from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with awareness. It doesn't come from seeking security in external things, but from strengthening your inner self. The question now is, how do you actually do this? How do you build a mind that isn't easily shaken by anything or anyone? The first thing you need to understand is that your mind is like a muscle. Just as the body needs training to gain strength, the mind needs practice to become resilient. The difference between someone who panics in the face of a problem and someone who remains calm isn't luck or natural talent. It's training. Every day, the way you choose to react to situations determines whether your mind is growing stronger or weaker. The first step in this transformation is learning to observe yourself. Most people live on autopilot, reacting to everything without questioning. If something goes wrong, they get frustrated. If someone criticizes them, they feel offended. If fear arises, they believe in it without hesitation. But what if, instead of reacting immediately, you simply observed what was happening inside you? If, when feeling anger, fear, or anxiety, you took a step back and asked yourself, why am I feeling this? Is this thought really true? Do I really need to react this way? That small space between stimulus and reaction is where your freedom lies. It's where you choose between being a prisoner of your emotions or mastering them. And the more you practice this observation, the more control you gain over yourself. The second step is understanding that your thoughts are not reality. The mind generates thousands of thoughts every day, most of them based on fear, the past, and limiting beliefs that were implanted in you. But a thought is not a fact. Just because your mind says, I'm not good enough, doesn't mean it's true. Just because you feel like something will go wrong, doesn't mean it will happen. The mind lies. And the secret to not being controlled by it is to question everything. The third step is to strengthen your state of presence. Most human suffering does not come from what is happening now. but from the stories the mind tells about the past and the future. You relive old traumas, worry about things that haven't even happened yet, and distance yourself from the only moment that truly exists, the present. But when you learn to anchor yourself in the now, you realize that much of your pain was merely a mental construct. What is happening at this very moment? Are you safe? Do you have everything you need right now? If so, then any suffering you are feeling comes from your mind, not from reality. Finally, the most powerful practice for building an unshakable mind is acceptance. Not passive acceptance, but intelligent acceptance. What does that mean? It means stopping the fight against life, stopping the resistance to what has already happened, and letting go of the desire for things to be different from what they are. It means accepting that you do not control the world, but you do control your response to it. It means understanding that every obstacle can be a teacher, every challenge can be training, and every pain can be an opportunity for growth. And when you embrace this mindset, something changes within you. You become as flexible as water, as adaptable as the wind. Nothing can break you because you no longer resist. You flow. And it is in this state that true peace happens. Not because the world has stopped having problems, but because you have stopped being dominated by them. The final question is, are you willing to train your mind every day until nothing and no one can affect you anymore? Because freedom is right in front of you. You just have to choose. We've reached the end of this journey, but the real transformation begins now. You've spent your whole life believing that your peace depends on the world being different, on people acting the way you expect, on circumstances being under control. But now you know that's an illusion. You've realized that the real battlefield was never out there. It was always within your own mind. Now I want to offer you something that's not for everyone, but it is for you, because you've made it this far, searching for deeper answers about who you are and where your life is headed. I've created something more than just a book. I've built a map for the soul, a manual that brings together science, philosophy, and critical thinking to help you break free from mental patterns, question your identity, and rebuild yourself from the ground up. This isn't an e-book full of feel-good quotes. It's a guide for those who can no longer stand living on autopilot. If you feel that something inside you is calling for change, growth, clarity, then this is your moment. Click the pinned comment and get instant access to the Self-Transformation Manual. Don't read it out of curiosity. Read it because your life depends on it. And if you choose to begin this journey, you won't be the same by the end of the road. Carl Jung taught us that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. You've seen how your mental programming, your fears, and your automatic reactions have kept you trapped in a cycle of suffering. But now, you have a choice. You can keep living on autopilot, letting your emotions and thoughts control you. Or you can take charge of your life and train your mind to be unshakable. What keeps most people from finding this peace isn't a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of practice. You may have understood everything we've talked about here, but if you don't put it into action, nothing will change. So I invite you, in the coming days, observe yourself. Notice when your mind falls into automatic reaction patterns. Question your thoughts. Choose a conscious response instead of an impulsive one. Learn to accept what cannot be changed and to change what is within your control. And most importantly, understand that the peace you've been searching for was never outside of you. It has always been here, waiting to be discovered. You just needed to stop resisting and finally allow it to emerge. If this video resonated with you, leave a comment saying, "I choose peace." Because by writing it, you're not just commenting, you're making a commitment to yourself. And before you go, if this content helped you, subscribe to the channel. After all, if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just another ordinary video. And if you want to continue this journey of growth, there's much more to come. Now I'll leave you with one last question. Will you keep letting the world dictate how you feel, or will you take back the power that has always been yours? The choice is yours.